The sound that finally stopped her was not loud. It was the quiet, expensive crunch of a $60,000 Escalade meeting something that refused to move. The impact echoed down our little Ohio street just after sunrise, a dull metallic thud followed by the hiss of a radiator giving up the fight. I stepped out onto my driveway with a cup of black coffee still warming my hands and watched steam curl into the cold morning air. Brenda Whitmore stood frozen beside her pearl-white SUV, staring at the object in front of her like it had personally betrayed her. My trash can. Or at least what looked like one. The lid was still slightly crooked, the same faded green plastic the city sanitation department issued to everyone on our block. From the outside it looked ordinary, maybe even a little scuffed from years of use. But Brenda had just discovered something very important about that trash can. It wasn't ordinary anymore. And the look on her face told me she was finally beginning to understand that the game she'd been playing for the last 3 months had just ended. The smell of hot coolant and burnt rubber drifted across the driveway, while the Escalade ticked loudly as the engine cooled. Brenda's perfectly manicured hand hovered near the dented bumper, her mouth opening and closing without a word coming out. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The neighborhood was still waking up. A sprinkler system hissed somewhere down the street. A dog barked behind a wooden fence. And right in the center of it all sat the trash can she had knocked over more than 50 times. Except today it hadn't moved an inch. I took a slow sip of my coffee and leaned against the porch railing, watching the scene unfold like the final act of a play I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. Because the truth is, this moment didn't surprise me at all. I knew it was coming. I knew the exact morning it would happen. I even knew the speed she'd probably be driving when it did. You see, when someone runs over your trash can once, it's an accident. When it happens twice, you start asking questions. But when it happens 57 times, all at exactly 6:15 in the morning, with the same SUV drifting a little too close to the curb every single Tuesday, that stops being coincidence. That becomes a pattern. And patterns are something electricians learn to notice very quickly. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old. I've been wiring houses across central Ohio for nearly 2 decades, and until 3 months ago, I thought moving into Pinewood Gardens was going to be a quiet, fresh start for me and my 2 kids after a messy divorce. Instead, it turned out I had just moved next door to the most determined HOA enforcer in the entire county. Brenda Whitmore believed our neighborhood had standards to uphold. Brenda Whitmore also believed my trash can was apparently the greatest threat to those standards. What she didn't realize was that every time her Escalade knocked that plastic bin across my driveway, she was slowly teaching me exactly how to solve the problem. And electricians, if nothing else, are very good at solving problems. 3 months earlier the street had smelled like fresh cut grass and summer rain when I first rolled my pickup truck into Pinewood Gardens. It was one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every mailbox matched and every lawn looked like it had been measured with a ruler. The kind of place real estate agents describe as peaceful community living. After the divorce, I was not looking for luxury. I was looking for stable. Somewhere my daughter Lily and my son Tyler could come stay on weekends without feeling like their father had completely fallen apart. The house itself was nothing special. A modest single-story place with a 2-car garage and a narrow driveway that sloped gently toward the curb. But it had something that mattered more than square footage. It was affordable. 20 years of running electrical lines through attics and crawl spaces had taught me that quiet was worth more than granite countertops. The first morning there I woke up before sunrise like I always do. Electricians get used to early starts. The air was cool and carried that faint smell of damp soil that comes after an overnight storm. I stepped outside with my coffee and noticed how still everything felt. No traffic noise. No sirens. Just the distant hum of a lawn mower starting up somewhere across the neighborhood. For the first time in months, my shoulders relaxed. I remember thinking that maybe this move was going to work out after all. Then I met Brenda Whitmore. She appeared at the edge of my driveway like she had been waiting for the exact moment I stepped outside. Perfect hair. Perfect white SUV parked in front of a house that looked like it belonged on the cover of a home improvement magazine. Brenda introduced herself with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. She explained that she served as the neighborhood compliance officer for the Homeowners Association. Not elected exactly. More like self-appointed. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had been enforcing small rules for a very long time. The grass height. approved mailbox colors, trash bin visibility, parking guidelines, community standards. The words rolled out of her mouth like items on a checklist she had memorized years earlier. I nodded politely while she talked, because I have learned something important after 2 decades of working inside other people's homes. Sometimes the fastest way to finish a conversation is to let the other person finish speaking. Eventually, Brenda glanced down toward the curb where my city-issued trash can sat waiting for collection day. The plastic lid rattled slightly in the morning breeze. Her smile tightened a little more. She said that trash containers should be placed carefully so they did not obstruct the clean visual lines of the neighborhood. I told her I had followed the city sanitation instructions exactly. 3 feet from the curb. Same as everyone else. She did not argue. She simply nodded and walked back toward her house. I remember watching her go and thinking that the whole interaction had been a little strange, but probably harmless. Neighborhoods always had that one person who liked rules a little too much. What I did not know then was that Brenda Whitmore believed rules were only the beginning. Because exactly 1 week later at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, the sound of shattering plastic woke me up for the first time. The first time it happened, the sound jolted me awake before my alarm even had the chance to go off. A sharp, hollow crack echoed through the quiet morning like someone snapping a plastic board in half. For a moment, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what I had just heard. Then came the rumble of a large engine idling outside, and the faint squeal of tires rolling slowly away from the curb. I pulled on a sweatshirt and stepped onto the front porch. The air was cool enough that my breath fogged slightly as I looked down the driveway. My trash can was lying on its side in the street with the lid snapped halfway off and garbage scattered across the asphalt like confetti after a parade. A trail of coffee grounds and cereal boxes stretched from the curb to the middle of the road. And slowly disappearing around the corner at the end of the block was a familiar pearl white Escalade. I stood there for a few seconds watching the empty street, the smell of stale food and damp cardboard drifting up from the pavement. At first I told myself it had to be an accident. Big vehicles sometimes drift a little too close to the curb. Drivers get distracted. Things happen. So I walked out there with a trash bag and started cleaning up the mess. The plastic sides of the bin had cracked where the tire must have caught the corner. Not completely destroyed, but definitely damaged. While I was picking up the last of the garbage, the front door across the street creaked open. Mrs. Alvarez, an elderly neighbor who watered her roses every morning, stepped onto her porch with a concerned look on her face. She watched me for a moment before shaking her head slowly. She said she had seen the whole thing from her kitchen window. According to her, the Escalade had not drifted toward the trash can by mistake. It had moved toward it very deliberately. I remember pausing with a crushed soda can in my hand while that information settled in. I asked if she was sure. She nodded without hesitation and told me the driver had slowed down right before reaching the curb, almost like they were lining something up. That explanation sat in the back of my mind all day while I worked on a panel upgrade across town. By the time evening came around, I had almost convinced myself it was probably nothing. People misunderstand things all the time. But exactly 1 week later at 6:15 in the morning, the sound came back. Another sharp plastic crack followed by the rumble of a large engine rolling away from the curb. When I stepped outside the second time, the trash can was lying in the same spot as before with fresh scrape marks across the side. This time I did not need anyone to explain what had happened. At the end of the block, the white Escalade slowed briefly before turning the corner, sunlight reflecting off the polished paint like a signal flare. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling random. 2 identical accidents at the exact same time on the exact same morning did not belong to coincidence. They belonged to intention. And the more I thought about the careful way Brenda Whitmore had inspected my trash can during our first conversation, the more a quiet little pattern started forming in my head. Still, I kept telling myself I could be wrong. After all, Pinewood Gardens was supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood. But over the next 4 weeks, that pattern kept repeating itself with mechanical precision every single Tuesday morning. By the 5th week, the sound had become part of the neighborhood's Tuesday morning routine. 6:15 sharp. The same hollow crack of plastic followed by the slow, confident rumble of 8 cylinders rolling past my driveway. At that point, I stopped pretending it was accidental. Patterns that precise do not happen by mistake. Electricians spend their entire careers tracing patterns through walls, ceilings, and circuit panels. Electricity always follows a path. People usually do too. The next Tuesday, I woke up 5 minutes earlier and waited by the front window with a mug of coffee warming my hands. The sky outside was still a deep blue-gray, that quiet moment just before sunrise when the streetlights are still glowing and the neighborhood feels half asleep. I could hear the distant hum of a delivery truck somewhere beyond the subdivision and the soft ticking of my kitchen clock counting down the minutes. At exactly 6:14, the Escalade's headlights appeared at the far end of the street. The vehicle rolled slowly toward my house like it had all the time in the world. When it reached the curb in front of my driveway, the driver's side tire drifted just a little to the right. Then came the sound. A quick plastic crunch followed by the dull scrape of the bin sliding across pavement. The SUV never stopped. It did not even slow down. It simply continued down the road with the same calm, steady pace until it turned the corner and disappeared. I stepped outside a few seconds later and found the trash can lying sideways again, its wheels spinning slowly in the cool morning air. The lid had finally snapped off completely this time. I stood there staring at the scattered garbage while the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops across the street. That was the moment I stopped feeling confused and started feeling curious. Because once you remove the idea of accidents, the whole situation becomes something else entirely. A problem. And every problem has a solution if you are patient enough to study it. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying attention to details. Brenda left her house at the same time every morning. 6:12. Her route down the street never changed. She always drove close to the curb, almost hugging the edge of the pavement like she was following an invisible line painted on the asphalt. The trash pickup schedule meant my bin was only at the curb once a week, which meant she only had one opportunity every Tuesday morning. Yet somehow she never missed it. The timing was perfect every single time. My daughter Lily noticed the damage during one of her weekend visits and asked why the trash can look like it had been through a storm. I told her it had been a rough few mornings. She laughed at first until the next Tuesday when she heard the sound herself. We both looked out the window just in time to see the Escalade roll past the driveway with the trash can tumbling behind it. Lily turned toward me with wide eyes and said the question that had been building in the back of my mind for weeks. "Dad, why does that lady keep running over our trash can?" I did not answer right away. Instead, I watched the white SUV disappear down the street again while the early sunlight glinted off its polished chrome bumper. In that moment, the whole situation became very clear. Brenda Whitmore believed she was teaching me a lesson about neighborhood standards. What she did not realize was that she had also been teaching me something. She had been showing me exactly where the problem was every single Tuesday morning. And once you know exactly where a problem is, fixing it becomes much easier. That night after Lily asked her question, the house felt unusually quiet. The kids had gone back to their mother's place for the week, and the only sound inside the kitchen was the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick from the wall clock above the stove. I sat at the table staring through the window toward the curb where the trash can usually stood every Tuesday morning. The plastic sides were scraped and cracked now, the lid completely gone, the wheels bent just enough to make it wobble whenever I rolled it out. I had replaced that bin 3 times already since moving into Pinewood Gardens. Each new one lasted a few weeks before meeting the same slow-moving Escalade at exactly the same moment every Tuesday morning. The strange part was that Brenda never said a word about it. Not once. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. She simply continued her morning drives through the neighborhood like a patrol officer making rounds. The following weekend, when Lily and Tyler came over again, they noticed the newest trash can sitting in the garage. Tyler ran his hand along the smooth green plastic and asked why I kept buying new ones if they kept getting broken. I told him sometimes solving a problem takes a little patience. He nodded like he understood, even though I could tell he was not completely convinced. Later that evening, while the kids watched a movie in the living room, I stepped outside onto the driveway and looked down the street toward Brenda's house. The porch light was on, and her Escalade sat in the driveway reflecting the soft yellow glow from the garage lamps. Everything about the vehicle looked spotless. Polished chrome. Perfect paint. Not a scratch anywhere. For someone who cared so much about neighborhood standards, she kept that SUV in immaculate condition. That detail stuck with me longer than anything else. Because people who value things that much usually expect those things to stay perfect. And when perfection is important to someone, it also becomes a very predictable weakness. Over the next few days, I started noticing other details as well. The exact line her tires followed along the curb. the speed she maintained as she passed my driveway, the way the trash can always tipped over toward the street instead of toward the grass. All of it formed a quiet little equation in the back of my mind. One variable moving the same way every week, colliding with another object placed in the same location every week. Any electrician will tell you that when two elements meet in exactly the same place over and over again, the outcome becomes very easy to calculate. That following Monday evening, I rolled the newest trash can toward the curb and stopped halfway down the driveway. The sun was setting behind the houses across the street, painting the sky in soft orange streaks that reflected off the windows. For a long moment, I stood there thinking about the last 3 months. The cracked plastic, the scattered garbage, the confused look on Lily's face when she heard the sound for the first time. Brenda Whitmore believed she was slowly pushing me into compliance with her version of neighborhood order. But what she did not realize was that every Tuesday morning, she had also been giving me more information, more measurements, more timing. By the time I rolled the trash can the rest of the way to the curb, I was not frustrated anymore. I was curious, because when someone repeats the same move often enough, you eventually learn exactly how to counter it. By the time the idea fully formed in my head, it was already Sunday afternoon. The garage door was open and the late summer air drifted in, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from somewhere down the street. My workbench was covered with the same tools I had been using for years: wire cutters, measuring tape, a small level, a bucket of spare screws and brackets from old electrical jobs. I stood there for a while staring at the newest trash can leaning against the wall. From the outside, it looked exactly like every other city-issued bin on our street. Same green plastic body, same molded handles, same faded recycling logo stamped into the side. But the important thing about problems like this is that they usually appear simple on the surface. The real solution is hidden inside the details. I pulled the measuring tape from my belt and checked the inside dimensions of the bin. 26 inches tall, about 18 inches across the base. Plenty of room. Next, I stepped outside to the driveway and studied the line where Brenda's Escalade always drifted toward the curb. Tire width, angle of approach, the slight slope of the pavement where the asphalt dipped toward the storm drain. It was all very consistent. The same path every Tuesday morning, like the vehicle was following a painted guideline that only she could see. When I walked back into the garage, the plan felt less like an idea and more like a simple piece of math. If one object keeps knocking another object over, the easiest way to stop it is to change what that object actually is. Monday evening after work, I stopped by the hardware store a few miles down the road. The place smelled like lumber and concrete dust, the way every hardware store does. I loaded a small bag of quick-set concrete mix into my cart along with a couple of scrap boards and a box of heavy-duty bolts. The cashier did not ask questions. People buy stranger combinations of materials every day. Back home, the sky was turning dark blue as the streetlights flickered on across Pinewood Gardens. I dragged the trash can into the garage and set it in the middle of the concrete floor. The sound echoed softly through the space. Then I mixed the concrete in a bucket using a length of scrap wood until the gray slurry thickened into something heavy and solid. Slowly, I poured it into the bottom of the bin, filling the base several inches deep. The plastic walls held the weight perfectly. To anyone looking from the outside, the trash can would appear completely normal. But inside it now contained close to 80 pounds of solid concrete anchored to the base with bolts running through the sides. When I finished the job, I stepped back and wiped my hands on a shop rag. The bin looked exactly the same as before. Same color, same shape, same quiet presence waiting beside the garage wall. The only difference was that this one would not slide across pavement when something touched it. I rolled it toward the curb just before sunset and positioned it in the same spot Brenda had been aiming for every week. The wheels clicked softly over the driveway seams as it settled into place. Then I stood there for a moment looking down the quiet street. The neighborhood was calm, porch lights glowing, crickets starting their evening chorus in the hedges. Nothing about the scene suggested that anything unusual was about to happen the next morning. But inside that ordinary-looking trash can was the answer to a problem that had been repeating itself for 3 straight months. And the most interesting part was that I did not have to change Brenda's behavior at all. I simply changed the outcome waiting at the end of her routine. Tuesday morning arrived with the same quiet rhythm the neighborhood always had before sunrise. The sky above Pinewood Gardens was a pale gray blue, and the streetlights still hummed softly over the empty road. Inside the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgled while the scent of fresh grounds filled the air. I stood near the front window holding a mug and watching the curb where the trash can waited. From the outside, nothing looked different. The green plastic bin sat in the exact same place it had every other Tuesday morning for the last 3 months. The only difference was something no one could see. I checked the clock on the microwave. 6:13. Right on schedule. The street outside was completely still except for the distant rumble of an engine turning onto the block. A moment later, the familiar headlights appeared at the far end of the road, 2 white beams sliding slowly across the pavement as Brenda Whitmore's Escalade rolled into view. The vehicle moved with the same deliberate calm it always did, like the driver had already memorized every inch of this street. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched the SUV approach my driveway. The engine's sound grew louder, a steady, confident rumble that echoed lightly between the houses. The Escalade drifted closer to the curb just like it always did, the right side tires creeping toward the trash can with almost mechanical precision. 6:15 exactly. The moment arrived so predictably it felt like watching the second hand on a clock reach the top of its rotation. Then came the contact. The sound was completely different this time. Instead of the hollow crack of plastic flipping over, there was a heavy solid thud followed by a sharp metallic clank from the front of the SUV. The Escalade stopped instantly. Not a slow pause like a cautious driver checking their surroundings, but a sudden halt that broke the quiet morning air. For a second, nothing moved. The trash can remained exactly where it had been placed, upright and perfectly still beside the curb. A faint hiss drifted from the front of the SUV while the engine idled unevenly. I stepped outside onto the porch just as Brenda opened her driver's door. She climbed out slowly and stared down at the trash, like it had violated some unspoken rule of physics. Her eyes moved from the bin to the front of her vehicle and back again, trying to understand why the usual outcome had changed. The chrome bumper of the Escalade now sat a few inches from the trash can, no longer aligned perfectly with the curb the way it had every other week. Steam curled faintly from beneath the hood, while the engine ticked quietly in the morning air. Brenda looked up toward my porch, and our eyes met across the driveway. I raised my coffee mug slightly in a small greeting. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The neighborhood around us remained calm. A sprinkler system clicked on across the street. Somewhere a garage door rumbled open as another neighbor started their morning routine. But right there at the curb, the pattern that had repeated itself for 3 straight months had finally reached a different ending. The trash can had not moved an inch. And judging by the confused expression on Brenda Whitmore's face, she had just realized that something in her carefully practiced routine had changed. Brenda Whitmore walked slowly around the front of her Escalade like someone trying to understand how a familiar piece of machinery had suddenly stopped behaving the way it always had. The early morning light reflected off the polished hood, while a thin curl of steam drifted upward into the cool air. Her eyes moved from the front bumper to the trash can and back again, repeating the same confused motion as if the answer might reveal itself if she stared long enough. I remained on the porch with my coffee, leaning lightly against the railing. From where I stood, the scene looked almost peaceful. The quiet suburban street, the soft sound of sprinklers running somewhere down the block, the steady ticking of the Escalade's engine cooling after its abrupt stop. Brenda crouched slightly and inspected the lower edge of her bumper with the focused expression of someone used to finding small problems before they became big ones. The chrome had shifted slightly out of alignment, and the plastic trim along the bottom edge now angled downward, where it had made contact with the trash can. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. Just enough damage to make it very clear that something solid had interrupted her usual routine. She stood back up and looked directly at the bin again, this time with suspicion instead of confusion. The trash can had not tipped over. It had not rolled away. It had not even shifted a single inch from where it had been placed beside the curb. For 3 months her vehicle had been able to knock that same object across the pavement like a lightweight plastic toy. Today the same maneuver had produced a completely different result. I took another sip of coffee and stepped down from the porch, walking slowly toward the curb. The gravel at the edge of the driveway crunched softly under my shoes. Brenda straightened as I approached and crossed her arms, the expression on her face settling somewhere between irritation and disbelief. She asked what I had done to the trash can. Her voice carried that familiar tone of authority she used whenever she reminded neighbors about community guidelines. I looked down at the bin for a moment before answering. From the outside, it still appeared perfectly ordinary. Same green plastic sides, same molded handles, same quiet shape that had been sitting there every Tuesday morning for weeks. I told her it was just a trash can placed exactly where the city sanitation department required it to be. 3 feet from the curb. The same rule everyone on this street followed. She glanced again at the front of her vehicle and then back at the bin, clearly trying to connect the two pieces of information. For a few seconds, the only sound between us was the gentle hiss of the Escalade's cooling engine and the distant rumble of a garbage truck somewhere across the neighborhood. Eventually, Brenda reached down and tried to move the trash can herself. The bin barely shifted. The wheels rolled a fraction of an inch before the weight inside settled firmly back against the pavement. That was the moment the realization crossed her face. Stepped onto her porch with a watering can in her hand, quietly observing the situation like someone watching the final scene of a familiar story. The garbage truck turned onto the block at that moment, its large engine rumbling steadily as it approached the curbside bins one house at a time. I stepped forward, rolled my trash can a few inches toward the edge of the street, and left it standing upright beside the curb exactly where it belonged. The garbage truck rumbled slowly down Pinewood Gardens like it had done every Tuesday for years, the hydraulic arms lifting bins and dropping them back against the curb with the steady rhythm of a routine that rarely changed. When the truck reached my driveway, the driver glanced briefly at the Escalade still parked crooked near the curb, and then at the trash can standing perfectly upright beside it. He pulled the lever, the metal arms lifted the bin, and the container emptied into the back of the truck without the slightest problem. When the arms set it back down, the wheels touched the pavement with a solid thump that sounded very different from the hollow crashes that had echoed through the street for the past 3 months. Brenda Whitmore watched the entire process without saying another word. The morning sun had climbed high enough now to reflect off the windshields along the block, turning the quiet street into a row of bright mirrors. The Escalade sat motionless beside the curb, its front bumper slightly misaligned, the engine finally quiet after cooling down. Brenda eventually walked back toward the driver's door with the stiff, careful steps of someone trying to maintain dignity while the situation around them had clearly shifted. She opened the door, paused for a moment, and glanced back at the trash can again like it had personally violated some rule in her mental handbook. Then she climbed into the vehicle and closed the door with a muted click. Who had seen the entire story unfold from the beginning. I rolled the trash can back toward the driveway once the garbage truck finished its route. The wheels moved smoothly across the concrete, heavy but stable, exactly the way I had designed them to behave. From the outside, nothing about the bin looked unusual at all. It was still the same simple green container issued by the city, sitting beside a modest house on a calm suburban street. But the difference now was that the pattern had ended. The following Tuesday morning, I woke up at the same time as always, poured my coffee, and stood near the window out of habit. 6:15 came and went. The street remained quiet. No engine rumble, no plastic cracking, no trash can tumbling across the pavement. The same thing happened the week after that, and the week after that. Brenda Whitmore still drove through the neighborhood each morning, but her tires stayed firmly in the center of the road whenever she passed my house. The trash can remained untouched beside the curb every collection day, just another ordinary object in a neighborhood full of quiet routines. Sometimes the simplest solution to a repeating problem is not confrontation or argument. Sometimes all it takes is understanding the pattern and placing something solid where the pattern expects weakness. And once that happens, the routine changes on its own.